Hello folks, in today's guide what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be looking at a couple things. One is research. Second, I'm going to go back to ground combat by the numbers, so I'm going to call it, so that we can see how ground combat is somewhat calculated. Nothing is here is written in stone here. It's just the from what I've read in the forums and my understanding of what's happening here. So I want to just take a look first at basically advancements with regard to units. So what we see here is infantry, armor, and of course air units here. Before I get into the advancements themselves, what you're looking at is what my favorite setup of unit information is, and you can change that by going into the top right here called options. So there's a little icon there called options that you can go into. And just to show you how these things kind of switch, right now I have it set up for the infantry units as average combat factor and operation points. So that's basically what I'm looking at here for my attack strength, so to speak. I still rely heavily on the odds, and that's what I have set up. Notice here when I go to change this, the numbers themselves also changed to take a look at attack versus defense strength that you have within the particular units. Your other option here is the strength of the unit. That's how many, like this is an infantry unit, 30 out of 30 unit strength out of all of it, and the operation points that it has at its disposal to be able to handle movement and an attack. So that's the setup that you have for land units. For air units, my favorite is I show the operational dots. Those are the two dots there. This is the air-to-air combat that you see. So again, just I should be drawing this. So here are my operational points. I have two of them there. This value of 9 here or 14 over here is the air-to-air combat value. Then I have land, that's the tactical strength that I have for attacking ground units. The middle is the attack for naval units out of all of it, and this last one here is for strategic bombing. I like this sort of setup for air units when I'm dealing with it. I'm not going to talk about naval units in this turn because I'm going to save it for a numbers by numbers guide in a future guide that I'm going to present. So those are the things that you can change if you want to change the appearance of what your air units look like. So for example, if I want the operational dots and then the numbers on the bottom to represent air-to-air combat, tactical, and naval, I could do so by just selecting the middle selector here. If I want to do air, tactical, and operation points without the dots, you could do that too. So here's the air-to-air combat, this is the tactical, and those are the operation points. You have your option of how you want to have your units look like. I'm using vanilla icons here, so these are the standard icons that were presented. You can see the little kind of a rectangle with a circle in it that represents armor. The little X is infantry. The airplanes have well, airplane on them, and mech has an X through the armor unit out of all of it. So these are different things that, as you know, time progresses, you're going to turn around and get comfortable and decide to pick which ones you prefer. I prefer average combat factors and operation dots, air-to-air, tactical, naval, and strategic for my air units and for my land units. For me, it's just easier to be able to understand what's happening here. So I'm just going to go back and save the units here. Now, when I look at advancements, what I've got here is this is a 1939 basic unit here. When you look, and what do I mean by a basic unit? These factors here affect, well, specifically these ones here, deal with combat. And as time progresses, you can add better weaponry as the years move forward. But these are your base values. So when you take a look at this, the base value for firearms is 4. For guns, it's 2. Artillery is 3, and so forth down the line. Let's just concentrate on firearms here. So this unit here its tech that it's going after is actually called assault. So this is the advancements that I'm hoping to tech up with this particular line of troops here. When I'm looking beneath that, then this particular unit here, you can see the base values are exactly the same. They all start off the same, but the difference in this situation is the tech that I'm exploring is anti-tank. So these units here are going to be better against armor units. That's the idea behind it. So how does this work? Well, let's go back up here and we see, and let's concentrate on just one number here. Actually, two numbers. We'll look at firearms and guns here. Okay, so we start off with 4 and 2. So I go into the advancement tab and I take a look at assault. Notice in assault, if I'm looking at firearms and guns here, I get an extra firearm for 1941 and 42. This is not a cumulative. That means I'm only going to increase 1. So instead of 4, I'm going to have 5 in 1941 and 42. The next one is going to be an increase of 2, and the last one is 3. So when you look at it from the point of view of units, you can see my base value is 4. In 1940, nothing changes, but here's the increase of 1. Here's the other increase of 1. Notice it's not added to the base value. 1 remains. There's only 1 added to the base value. It isn't until 43 that 2 will be added to the base value. So here's 39, 40, 41. 42, here's 43. Notice now 2 was added to the base value of 4. 2 again will be added to the base value of 4, and this last one has 3 added to the base value of 4 to get the 7 firearms. That's how advancements work. What happens is when you look at the advancement chart, these values are added to the base value. So only 1 is added to the base value in 41. Once again, only 1 is added to the base value of 42. And 2 is added in 43. That's how it works. Now if you look at assault and take a look at the guns, guns really don't increase other than by 1 in 1942. But when you look at anti-tank, you can see that the increase is more dramatic in 43, 44, and 45. Remember, guns is for tanks. The higher that value is, the better this unit is going to do against tanks themselves, so armored units out of all of them. And you can see how many tanks it has? None. No tanks whatsoever. Other important factors are its defense and anti-air. It isn't until 1943 that you have a change in the anti-air value out of all of them. So you can see here the texts themselves only change things by a little bit and concentrate on the area that they're actually talking about. So if I'm looking at an anti-tank advancement here, I'm going to be working on getting better with tanks. And you can see the effect overall when you're looking at the average of the attack value. So in all of these situations, and I'm just going to point out their efficiency is 100 and their experience is 90. I did that on purpose, and you'll see why in a bit. So in 1939, you could see the average strength value is 14, then it goes up, and then it goes up as the years progress because the technology gets better and better. Notice here, when I'm dealing with anti-tank, this tends to be more defensive in nature. It isn't until you start getting into later years, so 45, 40, 43 here, that you can actually see the strength value here is about 1 less. So this path here is defensively a little bit better than the path when you're dealing with assault. But I'd rather have more guns because I'd rather have that extra attack punch, because again, Warplan does not use a combat result table. It deals with percentages, and it goes through an entire process where air, artillery, then defensive guns fire, then firearms fire. There's a certain set rules for each of the attacks that occur. So dealing with infantry, I prefer assault because I want that extra bank. But when it comes to armor, I think totally different. So let's go back to the advancement table with armor. There's heavy armor and then there's breakthrough. So what seems to be the big difference between the two as we go back and forth out of all of it? Well, when you look at breakthrough, what you want to do is you want to be able to punch through the lines as quickly as possible. So the two things that jump out are defense and the number of tanks. These are the values that seem to change, and you can quickly check, and again, it works exactly the same way. You're going to be adding 1 to the base value in 41. 1 is being added to the base value in 42, and so forth down the line. So the rules don't change. What ends up happening is, again, what the advancements provide is what's important in this case. So when you look at breakthrough, operational points are increased, but when you deal with heavy armor, what you get is, and this is the big ticket item which I like, you get a lot more tanks. You get 5 tanks added to your base value in 1945. So when you look at this and just look at this row here, tanks here, you can see I'm getting 2 more tanks and having a lot more power from my point of view than when I'm dealing with breakthrough on the top. So the top row, if you were going to take a look at this so you can see, is the breakthrough. The base values are 3, 1, 4, and 5. So if I'm adding those tank values, you can see that I'm getting 8 tanks, 3 added in 1945, but I'm supposed to have 5 added to the base value, which gives me the 10 tanks, and you can see the difference in the average strength, which I like. So when I look at heavy tanks, I see 2 advantages to that, and this is usually the path that I try to push as quickly as possible. Defensively, stronger than the breakthrough unit, and more punch, more power, because you have more tanks at your disposal. So keep that in mind. I haven't even talked about upgrading yet through them, but usually the increase in upgrades from one group to another group is 10%. So whatever the production cost is, it's an increase of 10%. Notice when I go back to the advancement tables and look at interceptors, because that's what I have here, I have 3 choices to choose from. You can see this also through the unit itself. Notice here there's a little change the unit advancement which you can do, and it costs a certain percentage depending on the unit you're dealing with. So I have interceptor, escort fighter, and fighter bombers. Depending on your plan, your war plan here, and it also depends on the country. For example, being Germany, I know that the war is being taken to me. So I don't mind I start off in the 1939 scenario being at 40-year advancement. And I like pushing that advancement ahead of the Allies because I started a little bit ahead of the Allies, except for Britain, which started equally so. And I know that the war's coming towards me, so I don't need the distance. But when I take a look at interceptors, what I want you to concentrate on the range here. Okay, so take a good look at the range. There's no increase in range, but there's an increase in air combat. But when I go to move into escort fighters, from an Allied point of view, look at that range. Yeah, I'm losing 1 combat value out of it, but I'm gaining a lot of range so that these fighters can support my ground attacks from a lot further away. How further away? Well, I need to see if I'm adding 18 to the base value here. So what are the base values I'm dealing with here? Well, the base values I'm dealing with here is a range of 6. That is the base value that I have. So if I'm adding 6 to 18 here, you can see that it's matching my strategic bomber range. So that's huge. So from a German point of view, I might turn around and keep the advantage because I start in 1940. I would keep this going and adding as much research to this line. But if I was the Allies, I might take this route of escort fighters just to be able to get the range. So it really depends on the strategy that you want. To increase the effectiveness of its tactical bombing, there's also a fighter bomber here, and as you can see here, let's go back to the table. When I'm looking at the fighter bomber, you have a bit of an increase of range here, but the big ticket item here is if you take a look at the tactical. A fighter bomber is supposed to be able to support with ground attacks, like a P-47 for example. So I'm looking, or a Typhoon. So when you're looking at this, you can see a difference within the tactical. The air combat goes down, the range increases a little bit out of all of it compared to the interceptor when you go to compare. So the interceptor has the highest value when it comes to air-to-air combat. So it really depends on your strategy, what you want to be able to do. So if you want your fighters as an allied, or even as the Germans, to take part in some of the bombing runs to cause a little bit more damage with the infantry units, you're welcome to do so, and you have the options to do so. On top of it all, you can go into the options sections and change the appearance of all these icons here, the information that's provided. Furthermore, if you go to the website, the Matrix website, I'm going to do a shout out to Panzer Mike. He's done a fantastic mod with regard to changing the look of the map and also the units themselves, which adds so much more color and variety. He's just done a wonderful job, and others are doing the same, making them look, making your game look somewhat unique, which is really, really nice. Let's continue on now. Now, that was actually, from our point of view, advancements that you can look at. And again, it depends on your strategy, what you want to do. What I want to do is I want to look at how combat is affected. I mentioned in an earlier guide that terrain has a huge impact on the effectiveness or of the results of combat. So here are my German units here. They're all of strength 30. So here I'm taking a look at this unit. They're all strength 30. How can I tell? Well, I can turn around and see all of them will have a strength of 30. But what differs is their effectiveness. I've placed their experience all at 90, and the idea behind it is to show you how their average strength is affected based off of their effectiveness of the unit. So as you can see, the effectiveness of a unit really does affect its ability to be able to attack other units out of all of it. So when you look at this one, I've set this to 103. You could do that by providing supply trucks. If it's close to 100, it'll put it over the edge. So you can see the average attack here is 14. So this unit here has got some extra supplies. It's more, I can use the word eager, and more effective to be able to do an attack. Whereas these ones here, these ones have an 80 effectiveness rate, and then I'm going down from here. This is about half of effectiveness and down to 40% effectiveness, and you can see that the value here drops dramatically when it comes to combat. Now, one of the things that's a dead giveaway of how combat is going is the estimated odds. I say estimated because it's not exact. It's supposed to be provide with a bit of a fog of war in this game. Great idea. One of the other advantages I love about this game. Nothing is, things are expected, but they don't automatically have to happen. Remember, there's no combat result table here that's a CRT like you find in board games like Third Reich. So you're going to get some odd results every once in a while, but on average, things work out the way they should. So for example here, when I click here, I can see, well, I'm going to have to exit out of that. Oh, I have to declare war. Silly me. Sorry. Yep, don't forget not to declare war. Should have just said it in the scenario. But here now when I go to click, I've got 1 to 2 odds. We know that's not good. What ends up happening whenever I'm attacking at 1 to 2 odds, more than likely I could have attacker strength losses at a ratio of 10 to 1, 9 to 1, 8 to 1, 7 to 1, 6 to 1, 5 to 1, 4 to 1, 3 to 1, 2 to 1. and so forth. So I would expect something like 4-to-1 odds of losing attacker strength compared to defense strength losses. That's what I would expect out of all of it. 3 times the amount. So the attacker will lose about 3 or 4 times the amount. Now, will that happen for sure? We don't know. But you can see here they've lost 11, and this one here has lost 3. So it's pretty close to the attacker losing 3 strength to 4 strength to the 1 strength of the defender out of all of it. So you can see that's a predictable result. It's not always the case. So this one here has an effectiveness of 50. When I go to look at this, it had the same odds here. So a 10% effectiveness loss at 40 to 50 really doesn't seem to impact the odds themselves. When I go to attack, again, I can see that it's the attacker loses about 4 times the amount as the defender. Now, what I love about this game is that it doesn't have a CRT table. So what happens is if the odds are a little bit closer, and this has happened to me, what ends up happening is that the defender might surrender. And it doesn't happen often, but it can happen, which is awesome because in real life, I mean, that happened within the early Battle of the Pacific when the Japanese had attacked, I believe it was Singapore. The British surrendered, and the Japanese had a weaker force, hindsight, than the British at the time. So keep that in mind. That's one of the, again, brilliance of the game here that I really love, that you could have every once in a while that oddity, that ambush in naval and so forth. This one here, you can see now that the strength is a little bit higher. The effectiveness is 81% here. So again, when I look at combat, you can see now the ratio is different. Now it's 1-to-1. It's not 1-to-2. So I would still expect that the attacker is going to lose more than the defender, but it's going to be closer to a 1-to-1 ratio. Maybe it's going to be like 10-to-7. So the attacker will lose 10 strength and the defense was 7. That's usually on average, sometimes double the amount. In other words, let's say that the attacker lost 10 and the defender lost 5. That's the range I usually expect, and that usually works out. And you can see in this case it turned out to be more than that. Again, the randomness of the game. It happens. As you move next, you can see that these units here, their effectiveness is 103, so they're really been supplied well and ready to attack. And you can see the odds again have changed. So this is an example of effectiveness changing your combat odds because the troops are better prepared to fight. So part of the formula that's under the hood here that only Mr. Souza knows affects combat, and so you need to keep an eye on your effectiveness. If your units keep attacking, every time you attack, what ends up happening is that the units lose effectiveness. Every time they move, they lose effectiveness. So you need to keep an eye on it and see what happens. Now, the estimated attack here is a 2-to-1 odds, so I would expect almost even attacker losses to the defender losses here. And as you can see here, it's almost identical. So the game does do what it's supposed to do, so to speak, on average. But every once in a while, because you're not dealing with a CRT table, you're surprised. A lot of people get upset because if they're used to a CRT table, there's a range. Oh, if you roll a 1, you're going to lose 5-to-1 attacker versus defense. If you roll a 2, 4-to-1. If you roll a 3, 3-to-1, and so forth. And the most you might be able to do is maybe lose 2-to-1 or whatever, and then people are happy with that, or that's what they're used to. But I think this is where this game differs. You might get a surprise every once in a while. Now, I mean that on the rare occasions, and surprises do happen in war. So I mean, the strategy, the development of the game itself, that's what I look at as brilliance there, and revolutionary in a sense, because those surprises. So for example, in this particular attack here, this unit, the 10-6 here, may have surrendered out of the blue. Weak, general or whatever decides that he's not going to take a chance on his troops, assuming that the attack will be a lot worse for him. Who knows? That randomness is in this game, which I tend to really appreciate. Now, attack by the numbers. You can see the odds here turned out to be 2 to 1 when I originally attacked. By the numbers, so the first step, whenever an attack is created, and this comes from reading the forums here, 40% is what's used within the attacker's strength. So whatever that attacker's strength is, and it's not 10 plus 11, you take 40% of it and you've got your numbers, because like I said, an attack in this game is broken up into different aspects. There's ground support and artillery attack, then there's defensive fire from the actual defending unit, then there's firearms fire. There's a specific order in which things occur. So in general, when we were reading, or when I was reading this in the forum, what ends up happening, whatever the strength is, so I'm going to call that S here, 40% of it is used within the attack itself. So that means these units here are basically attacking with 40% of their attack strength. That's the idea behind it. If you've ever played the game Third Reich, it sort of makes sense, because what we used to do is we used to take the defenders and we'd have numbers here. Let's say this was the defensive factor. We'd turn around and say, hey, now we double it, so it's 12. And then we go 10 plus 11, and the ratio 11 to 12 would give me a 1 to 2 ratio for my attack. So that's happening in a sense, but in a different format. So keep that in mind. So effectiveness affects combat. What else affects the strength of your unit for combat? Experience does. So here we take a look at these units here. I start off with these two at 100. You can see their strength is 14. Here you've got 12, and their experience is 80%. So you can see the experience here is 90%, sorry, 90%. Here it is 80%. Notice my effectiveness is 100 because I don't want it affecting this combat. Here my experience is 60%. Where am I seeing that? Some of you are probably saying right here. This is my value for experience here. So what I've done is I've changed the experience value for all these units. So these were 90. Here this was 80, 60, and all I did was go down the line so that you could see here how this works. Here I've got experience of 50%. Here I'm down to 20%. Here I'm down to 10%, and you can see a huge drop in the strength of the unit. The more experience a unit gets, the more it will be able to combat better. So here I've got here 10 for two of them here. Okay, so let's see this in action now. Again, a dead giveaway of how the battle is going, and set up perfectly from the point of view of the game, are the estimated odds. So when I look at 3 to 2, the attacker has a bit of an advantage in a sense, but I would expect that I'm going to take heavier losses than the attacker in this situation. That's what I would expect. So what would be a good attack? Well, good would be 3 to 1. Better would be 4 to 1. 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1, really good. At 7 to 1, 8 to 1, 9 to 1, you're going to possibly get the unit to retreat almost for sure, and possibly shatter. At 10 to 1, anything really above 7 to 1, you can have the possibility of the unit shattering, and that has its own impact, which I need to talk about in a different guide. So let's take a look at this, and let's go with this and see how this attack goes. So you can see 7 to 5. The attacker lost 7 strength to 5. It's relatively close. Here, when I attack this one with lesser experience, I still have the overall average, overall ratio. So 90 to 80 didn't seem to have too much of an impact, and usually that's where you kind of get your troops to by 1943-44. So here in attack, and you can see again the numbers are pretty close. 8 to 6 was my attacker strength loss to my defender. But now as my experience drops down to 60, you can see my odds drop too. So now I'm expecting higher losses when I attack. Not bad. I got lucky there with a 6 to 4. And again, here I'm dealing with 50% here. This was 60, so it's a little bit lower. And you can see the odds again. Notice my attacker losses are higher. And this one here, where I drop down to 20% here, you can see the odds are even worse, so I expect even higher losses by the attacker. And look at this 5-to-1 ratio there. This here is at 10%, and 0-to-1 is like the worst. You can see I've lost 6-to-1 odds there. In fact, if you keep attacking here, more than likely what's going to happen is, notice here the attacker just is the one that keeps losing here. That nothing really happens to the defender when 0-to-1 occurs, to a point that your strength turns out to be 0, and in the end, boom, you'll see that eventually they're just going to disappear out of all of it. Notice I keep attacking, and all I'm losing is, well, I got no more things. All I'm losing here is my unit strength out of all of it. I'm down to 8 and 7, and usually these things get wiped out. Here I've got again 10%, and again you can see here the 0-to-1 odds again, and you can see when you get to 0-to-1, you don't usually lose anything when it comes to being a defender. So in summary, the effectiveness and the experience of the units will affect the combat that you have. So keep that in mind. What you want is you want to slowly gain experience, and that improves your actual units. At the same time, you don't want to run them ragged. In other words, if you keep attacking, you're going to find your effectiveness every time you attack drops. I believe it's about 6%. Your effectiveness drops. In fact, when you move, I believe you drop 1% effectiveness before you attack or anything. So keep that in mind. The lower your effectiveness, the less your odds are going to be, or the less effective you will be on your attack. Pardon the pun out of all of it. How about terrain? Well, I've spoken about terrain before, so I've set up a little mini attack here, if you will. Again, I'm attacking the British units here. So this British unit is in a mountain, and the weather is clear, so weather won't have an impact on the effect here. Here, this unit is in the forest and will have be impacted also by the forest. But if you take a look in between here, there's also a river. Here there's no river, but again, this British unit, if you look at the bottom here, you can see that this unit, the weather's clear, but it's in a mountain area here, so it'll have an effect on combat itself. Whereas if I click on this British unit, there's no river, but again, it turns out I'm in a plains area. I didn't put it in a forest, unfortunately, but that's okay. It's all good for calculations, but I'm in a clear area here with no river. Okay, so let's analyze this for a split second. If I go to attack here, I get 1-to-2 odds. If I go to attack here, because this comparison is exactly the same without the river, I'm getting 1-to-1 odds. Why is that? Well, again, if we're dealing by the numbers here, these units here, and I'm just looking at strength as percentages. Let's say that this unit here starts, the strength of these 3 units attacking starts off at 100%. So of that 100%, what is it really using as an attack? Well, as mentioned earlier, for the attack itself, it uses 40%. When you're crossing a river, what ends up happening is you lose 50% of that. So what ends up happening because of the river, all of a sudden I got 40%, and that's multiply here by 50% here. So this strength here, if you think about it, is 40. That's the actual value. If I take 50% of 40, I'm going to end up with a value of 20. So while my units were at 100 strength here, whatever that value is, right now crossing the river, it's only using 20 of it to actually do the attack. Now, going up a mountain adds a 60%. So I'm looking at 40% times 50% times a 60% modifier. So if I take 20 and multiply it by 60, I'm going to get 12. So of my 100 strength value, I'm really only attacking by 12%. So in other words, when I look at this, only 12% of my strength value is basically doing this suicide attack on this mountain across a river. That makes absolute sense. Whereas if I'm looking at these three units, here attacking, there's no river. So the modifiers that take into effect, if I start off with that 100, is the attack is, I'm using 40 of that. That's 40% right there. The actual mountain affects it 60%. So if I take 60% of that, I'm going to end up with 24. So without the river, I've doubled my chances for an effective attack. Now, I've read that in the forum that Mr. Souza wrote back, which is how it kind of works. Again, when you're looking at the combat values, that's the ratios that are provided are the best way of looking at this. But that makes perfect sense that these units here who are not going across a river, they don't suffer any penalty whatsoever. So when you take a look at this, again, I'm looking at this and I can see some of the modifiers here. So it looks like it's a mountain and a river out of all of it. I've got 1 to 2 odds. So if I've got 1 to 2 odds here, I would expect that I'm going to take heavier losses from an attacking point of view than I would in the combat here. So let's try this. And oh, I got a retreat. I got lucky here, but I lost 7 to 1. That was the ratio. So that was a pretty heavy price to pay. It turns out I got a lucky roll somewhere down the line with a random die, because again, one of the beauties of this game is I was surprised by that. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not surprised," but I was. I didn't expect it to retreat from a mountain because that allows me to move forward. Now, when I go here, you can see the odds are a lot better. They're 1 to 1. So I would expect I'd still lose more attack strength than the defender, but it'd be closer in value out of all of it. 7 to 4. And again, as luck would have it, the random roll did not get this unit to actually retreat. Now, the same can be applied if you're going into a forest here. So if I'm going into a forest, there's a certain percentage that affects the actual attack. Now, I usually look at the bottom of the screen here, okay? So I don't rely on icons all the time. And it's weird that that's actually showing a mountain there, because I could have swore that I put a forest there. Okay, so I clicked it there. Let me go there. Thank you. There it is. It's just because I moved my cursor. So you can see I've got a forest there, okay? So that is going to have an impact too. I don't remember the percentage of the forest, but you're going to have two modifiers. So if these two units attack here, you're going to get the 40% for your strength attack, then the 50% for crossing the river, plus a certain modifier for the forest itself. You have to check the manual, because like I said, what ends up happening is I don't have these things all memorized, but I understand it from the point of view of my odds here. So when I look at my odds here, I've got 1 to 2 odds, knowing that I'm going to heavily lose, more than likely 3 or 4 times the amount of my attacker strength than I would with my actual defense strength. So notice 11 to 4, that's almost 3 times the amount of attacker strength that I would lose. So those are good ways of actually looking at this. Unfortunately, did I put it? No, I put this as a plains here, even though it looks like a forest. I was hoping to put a forest there, mea culpa. So I can then do an attack here, and notice the odds would be different, because again, this is a plains, it's not a forest, so it doesn't have the impact of the forest modifier. I would expect that this battle would be close, but I'd probably lose maybe, and notice I'm trying to estimate beforehand and see if I'm surprised or not, probably twice the amount of attackers than I would defenders out of all of it, and sure enough, I was close to that. Once you do a lot of the battles, what ends up happening is you get a pretty good idea of how they actually turn out. And I am doing this on the fly here. It's not that I read this beforehand. It's just that I've played the game so often that I know on average how things should actually work out. But It doesn't mean that they're going to. You've got to keep that in mind, okay? So it doesn't mean that it's going to be that way. Okay, port supply. To get this working and making sure that things are going the way they should be going here, I just want to make sure I'm declaring war on everybody. Okay, I had to go forward a turn here just to kind of show you what's happening. It tells me here that I've got a unit that's not receiving any reinforcements. So I click on the top right here. So there's this little icon over here that you can click on. Okay, so I look at it and it says unit has basic supply. I click on it and it takes me to that particular unit, which now I can talk about port supply, especially in another guide when I do invasions. So I click on the port here, and when I look at the port, it tells me that I've got a size 2 port, here's the size of it, and that 40 supply. Of the 40 supply, I have 0 left. So that means the units here that are on land are using the 40 up. In fact, I don't have enough supply to be able to support all 3 units. If this is of strength 30 and this is of strength 30 and this is of strength 30, that means I'm going to need 90 supply to be able to effectively keep the units, and I'm using the word effectively, to keep the units where I want them to be. In other words, so that I don't get reductions. This won't increase when it starts going down as much as it normally would if the person was in full supply out of all of it. So what happens, and the reason why I bring this point up, is that a person goes to invade and they're going along and all of a sudden they start getting all these little error messages here to the effect that these things are basic supply, and they're going, wait a minute, I'm like capturing land here. What's going on here? I should be able to do whatever I want. And the answer to that is no, you should not be able to do whatever you want. In other words, a port can only supply a certain amount of factors. That's what we call port supply. When you have and you want to calculate how much it can actually do, because we're doing by the numbers, each port can supply 20 points. So a port of size 1 can support 20. A port of size 2 can do 40, and etc. down the line. Notice also ports like port of size 9, which can supply 180. It also has other abilities like repair and upgrade ships. So even the size of the port itself determines other things that can happen, whereas a 1 and a 2 cannot upgrade a ship or repair a ship. So those are little things that you have to keep in mind. I believe 5 is the tipping point where it starts to upgrade and do repairs at the same time. But you're limited to the supply based off of the size of your port. And because you're limited by the supply, yes, you'll have units that will get the basic supply, the food and necessities that they need. But as they get into combat, what will happen is their effectiveness will drop and not recover as quickly. And we all have seen that when the effectiveness of a unit drops, so does its ability to fight. And as a result, you're going to get units that are fatigued and easily attacked and damaged and also destroyed. What you want to be able to do is try to keep your units that you've created. You don't want them actually destroyed, because that's even worse from our point of view. Okay, moving forward now. Units can get specialties. So what ends up happening is these units have a specialty. The way you can tell is the little icon here. Each specialty has its own little icon. There's actually 6 of them here. This one here is the engineer one, so that means that rivers will receive 25% less, so half of whatever the penalty was. So instead of 50% penalty, you're only going to get 25%. Does it affect combat? Yes, it does. So the only factor I have here when you take a look at these units, so again, the effectiveness is 100% for all of these units here. The only difference is, it turns out, oh, this one here had experience 80. Oops, slipped. But the only difference here is when you go to attack a river. When I zoom in a bit here, you can see I put the river all around the unit here. And here again, I get 1-to-1 odds. So here I'm not attacking the mountain. What's happening is, again, you're seeing here there are factors that are contributing to this. So without the specialty, I'm expecting a higher loss ratio here when I attack from here than I would here when I go to attack at the better odds. And you can see here I got 8-to-6, which is relatively 1-to-1 out of all of it. And here I got 9-to-3, which was 3-to-1 losses with regard to my attack, from attacker's strength loss to defender's loss. So you can see what ends up happening is units themselves can get specialized. Now the question is, how does that happen? Well, I can't show it here. I can show it in-game when I do an in-game guide. But what will end up happening as you attack more and production, you're going to get a part of a dialogue points dialogue box extend here with specialization points. So when you click on the unit, let's say, okay, so what specialty do you want this unit to have? You can then click on this and pick out of 6 different specialties. The 6 different specialties, I'm sorry about the jump up, but it's when I use the right on the screen, it goes automatically to the left. You have Elite, which increases the unit's experience by 10% automatically, and that can't be removed. You have Engineers that reduce the make river crossing a little bit easier because they used to build bridges and so forth. So instead of a 50% penalty crossing rivers, you're only going to get 25%. Heavy artillery reduces 1 entrenchment level. This is not accumulative, so it can only do it 1. If you know about entrenchments, their modifier is they'll add 10% modification to your attack. So just like, a river was 50%, I took 40, multiplied it by 50. I would multiply it by 10% for each of the entrenchment levels that I have. We're going to take a look at tank destroyers next. That adds 2 to the gun values, which makes them more effective against tanks. The other one is Infiltrator. Infiltrator is a 5% bonus to force retreats. And the one that seems to be missing on the bottom is the Winterized combat effect, which basically gives a 100% bonus to units in snow and blizzard. Okay, unfortunately that didn't come up there, and I'm hoping I can get the weather here to cooperate so that we can see this in action. I may have to add a little part to this video, but here we take a look at this specialty. The specialty here is anti-tank here, and of course you're attacking tanks. So does it have an impact? Well, when you take a look at the odds without the specialty, and again the effectiveness that I'm looking at, the units themselves here are both 80, so more in line with what's happening here. It looks like I'm given 1-to-1 odds here. Again, with the experience being 80 and effectiveness being 100, notice I'm getting a little bit of better odds here when it comes to this particular attack. So this is pretty close. That's pretty good. I'd expect this. I would expect this to be a little bit worse, but it turned out to be exactly the same. Surprise? A bit. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. Now,